There we go. Oh, so you missed the beginning bit. Okay, so that's kind of what some of the definition of that. So why is it important? And as I say, I'm focusing on this thing about developing leaders that last. That's really the key thing. Why is it important? This is kind of my inspiration for calm leadership. I read a book a little while ago, probably about 3 years ago, I think now, called Quiet Leadership by Carlo Ancelotti, who's a very famous football manager. The theme of football, you'll see, does come through this a little bit. I'm a huge football fan, and I have a lot of respect for Carlo Ancelotti, who has managed some of the biggest clubs in the world, Real Madrid, Chelsea, some huge clubs that he's managed over time, AC Milan, etc. And he's won all these sorts of trophies. He's very famous for having an approach which isn't volatile. And so his quote says, there is power and authority in being calm and measured, in building trust and making decisions coolly, in using influence and persuasion, and in being professional in your approach. My approach is born of the idea that a leader should not need to rant or rave or rule with an iron fist, but rather that their power should be implicit. It should be crystal clear who is in charge, and their authority must result from respect and trust rather than fear. I believe that I've earned the respect I'm shown, partly through a successful career, delivering trophies for my club. You have to be successful, I think, to have that respect. But perhaps more importantly, because of the fact that I respect those I work with. These people trust me to do the right thing, just as I trust them with their roles in the organization. And I read that book, and it's loads of examples about, the way that he led, but also there are reflections from people that he worked with, some quite, big and famous players, reflected on how they saw him as a boss. And for me, that really resonated, because the whole start of this journey for me about thinking about leadership, and I say actually, just for the absence of any doubt, he is the one on the right-hand side who is, as you can see, appearing very calm, as opposed to Zinedine Zidane, who stood next to him, giving it the full blast. But ultimately, sorry, I forgot that. Also, some stuff about his relationship with his players, I think, has been really important as part of that. But this kind of started for me when, in my role as chair of the Haringey Secondary Heads Forum, one of the things that I do is I often go and see the other head teachers, the ones who are newer in role. So maybe they've just started headship, or maybe they're sort of 2 or 3 years into the job. And one of the things that I got asked over and over again by people that were new to headship is, given that you've been doing this job for, as it was at the time, sort of 14 years, 15 years, 16 years, now nearly 17 years, how do you do it? How on earth are you still doing this job after that many years, and you're still enjoying it, you're still enthusiastic about it, you still got your energy, you still feel focused about it? And actually, when they first asked me the question, I have to be honest, I didn't know the answer. I just knew that I still enjoy it. If I'm honest, I enjoy it even more now than when I started, because when I started, I think I was scared of my own shadow, to be honest, for the first 3 years in the job. So I knew that I enjoyed it. I knew that my enthusiasm was still there, my optimism, my desire to continue improving and be better than I am. But I didn't actually know the reason why. And these are the sorts of things that they were asking me, how do I do that? How do I manage emotionally? How do I maintain that honesty and integrity and staying true to my values, when, as we know, leadership really challenges that? Because sometimes you're dealing with situations where you're having to make decisions where actually, honesty, integrity is really quite difficult. How do I lead with humanity?
I need to leave this on. I was just going.
Oh, sorry. How do I lead with humanity in my heart while still being able to take tough decisions? Because there are some decisions that you take as a leader that actually have a negative impact on people's lives. The most extreme would be redundancy or dismissal. And I've done both of those over the years. Usually it's not quite as serious as that, but nevertheless, you are making decisions that have an impact on people's lives. One of the biggest things in my school that is so emotionally charged is, who sits in which office, or who gets which classroom, even things like that. As you can imagine, as I'm sure within your own experiences, people get really upset by those things, and you have to be able to make those decisions while still remaining humane in what you do. how can I be a leader that lasts? That for me is absolutely critical and the real core of what I'm trying to do. How do I overcome imposter syndrome? And that's something that everybody faces, and I'll talk a lot more about that in a little while. Why is it important? More than 1 in 3 secondary school leaders in England and 1 in 4 primary school leaders left at some point in the first 5 years after their appointment in 2015. And those are official statistics. Lots of people taste leadership and don't like it and decide, you know what, I'm not doing this. This is not for me. And that's something that we need to overcome, because we need good leaders leading for the long term. In terms of looking at ethnicity, because obviously, you know, I know that the Leaders Like Us course is very much about, you know, trying to promote people from different ethnic backgrounds to become leaders. And you can see, I don't need to go through the data, you can see very, very and you would see very, very similar numbers. Underrepresented in terms of being deputies and assistants, hugely underrepresented, and again, particularly in terms of being head teachers. So I think there's a lot of reasons why we need to look at leadership in terms of what are we, you know, how do we become leaders who can overcome those difficulties and challenges and really embrace leadership and really last in it. So that's kind of what this is about. In terms of looking at, you know, the lack of Black people in particular in leadership, these are some of the things that I'm aware has come out from the data. When I talk to colleagues, these are the sorts of things that they often talk about, you know, not believing that they're going to be given an opportunity. You know, I recently advertised for senior leaders in my school, deputy head teachers and also assistant head teachers, all in the last sort of 12 months or so. And we really struggled to get applicants from people from global majority backgrounds. And I think these are some of the reasons why. I mean, I've got to now reflect on what we did during the recruitment phase that didn't have the impact that I wanted it to. But as I say, people often believe they're not going to be given the opportunity. The idea of headship itself is not attractive. There's a situation where people feel that as a person of color, you know, you're going to be judged more harshly if things go wrong. There are lots of different reasons, not enough opportunities, poor or biased recruitment process. So lots of different things that are there as potential barriers, but you have to try and get through them, and you have to have a belief that you can do that. Sorry, I did say the football theme was relevant, and I keep coming back to it. These are 2 of my heroes. I'm a big Arsenal fan, as you know from what Simon said at the beginning of the meeting. Arsene Wenger is an absolute hero of mine. But I have to say, even though he's a rival, so is Sir Alex Ferguson. I use them as examples because they are both people who managed to lead for a very, very long time and maintained a level of success that would suggest they had some kind of a formula for remaining motivated, remaining focused, to continuously learn and so on. However, in terms of their approaches and their styles, very, very different people, very different characters, very different approaches to leadership. And the reason why I think that's important is that, you know, I'm talking to you today about calm leadership, which I think is very much something that I am comfortable with. It kind of represents the kind of leader that I am, but I am not in any way suggesting to you that you have to replicate the same thing, because ultimately you have to lead in the way in which is best for you. And I think that's really important. If you're going to get opportunities and make the most of them, it's important that you decide for yourself what kind of leader you want to be and aspire to be the best version of yourself that you can be. And I think that's really important. So in terms of the whole kind of calm leadership model, there are 4 areas to this. Conveniently, they spell the word calm because it makes it memorable. So the first phase is the confrontation phase, which is confronting some of the challenges of being a leader. The adaptation phase, where you start to gain a bit more of a sense of perspective and you start to really kind of grow into the role and accept it for what it is. There is the leading phase, which is very much about how you then convey that leadership to influence other people. And what I call the maturity phase, which is when you are actualizing the kind of leader that you want to be based upon the development that you've had and the learning experiences, and ultimately some of the hardships as well that you go through as a leader naturally. And they break into kind of two different areas. So the C and the A, the confront and the adapt, is very much about what I call achieving internal calm. So that's the things that you need to do to have a sense of calm internally in your head, basically. And then the other things, the lead and the maturity, is very much about the ways in which you effectively and impactfully convey an external calm that has an impact on other people. Today, because of time, I'm going to spend most of my time on the achieving internal calm bit. So we'll look at the reducing imposter syndrome, we'll look at dealing with paranoia, we'll look at developing a sense of perspective, and we'll look at embracing the difficulty of leadership. I'll only touch on the other bits, and maybe there's room for another session to maybe look at the other two bits at some other point in the future, if it's something that you guys feel interested in doing. But I think in terms of time, I've only really got time to go through the two things, the first two things in any kind of depth. So that's, as I say, reducing imposter syndrome and developing a sense of perspective. So those two areas are the areas that I'll focus on the most. So before I begin that, just to say, in terms of like my leadership, what does it mean to me? I think there is a moral imperative for leadership, and I think the added definition or the added dimension for me of being, you know, a person from a global majority, you know, how does that match with your colleagues, your parents and governors? Because you may have a different moral imperative from the people that you're leading. Integrity, honesty and transparency, knowing that based on stereotypes that exist, maybe those things are not taken for granted. There are people who will expect you to demonstrate and prove yourself in those areas, because maybe if your face is mine, you know, as I was when I first got into headship, a young black guy with a gold tooth, etc., etc., you've got to really demonstrate and prove yourself. Leading people and not systems. You know, do people react differently towards you if you are a person of color? Vision and values, again, you know, your vision and values can be very much influenced culturally. And so what's the challenges of that if you're leading an organization which is predominantly white British organization, for example? Accepting that leadership is tough because it's supposed to be, and I'll come back to that in a little while. And, you know, what if that thing that makes it tougher is in relation to your ethnic background, how people view you? The resilience bit is important. Again, do people react differently to you? And this notion of serving others, for me, that's really important. You know, the notion that being a leader is ultimately about giving service. So, confront uncalm feelings. Firstly, imposter syndrome. Everybody has this. It's so important to know that. Even the people that will tell you that they don't, I think that they're not being honest. I think everybody has that, you know, this inability to believe that your success is deserved or legitimately achieved as a result of your own efforts and skills. Everybody has that time where they feel like a bit of an imposter, you know, do I really belong here? Can I really do this? And one of the things that I would say about it is that I'm not sure that it ever disappears forever, because I think it goes through different phases, but I'll come back to that in a moment. Maya Angelou, everybody knows who Maya Angelou is. She says, I've written 11 books, but each time I think, uh-oh, they're going to find out now. I've run a game on everybody and they're going to find me out. And I think there's always that sense of waiting to be found out. I think that can happen, certainly with imposter syndrome. And this one I love, from Eleanor Roosevelt: no one can make you feel inferior without your consent. And I think what's really important about that for me is that you can overcome imposter syndrome. You can manage it, but you have to gain control effectively of what's up here. It's all about what's in your head and how you gain control of that. So for me, one of the key things to this, for me, has been the ability to turn my negative thoughts into positive ones. So it's all of the stuff that comes up in your head when you're feeling insecure about your leadership role. So down the left-hand side, are the negative voices. You can't. It's too soon. You're not good enough. You're getting it all wrong. You used to be good at this, but not anymore. Maybe your strength lies elsewhere. Everyone can see that you don't know what you're doing. Now, the reason I think these are really important is because it reflects what I just said, which is that I don't think that imposter syndrome is something that just happens at the start of your career of leadership and then goes away, because it changes and evolves over time. Hence the, it's too soon can become you're getting it all wrong because you're going through a period of time where it's a bit sticky and things are not going well. So suddenly you're having that problem. You used to be good at this, but not anymore, because you can be really experienced, but actually start to feel like things are changing and you're not changing with them. And can I still do this? So that imposter thing can come at any time. And I think people need to be ready for that. But there are things that you can do about it. And what I ask people to do, I coach a few people, and obviously the people that I line manage at work as well, is I ask them to create for each of the negative voices that they have an alternative positive voice. But it's not enough just to say, when the voice says to you, you can't do this, saying, yes, I can, I don't think that's enough, because just saying it doesn't really make you mean it or feel it. You have to also have an affirming rationale that backs it up. And I think that's really important. So you can see on the table, you can't, yes, I can. Well, yeah, why can you? Think about all the things you've achieved in your career that demonstrate that you have the desired skill set, because you will have examples of things that you've done that you can say, no, I know I can, because I did X and Y and Z, and because I achieved this, and because I successfully managed to make that situation work, or I fixed that problem. So it's not just thinking things that are affirmational, but actually what's the rationale for that affirmation being an absolutely true thing as well. I'm ready, my time is now. Remember that it's not what you've done and how long you've done it, it's how much you've learned and the potential that you possess to do better. And that, I think, is important. I am more than good enough. I love this one. Think of some people who are doing what you need to do now, but they're not as good at you, as good as you are, or they're not as skilled as you. Yeah, but they already do what you do. If they can, then so can you. And there are always examples of that. People that are doing the job that you're currently trying to do, who are not necessarily that brilliant, but they're managing to do it. So why can't you? You are absolutely good enough. You are going to make mistakes, but again, think about it. Think of all when you make a mistake and you get something wrong, don't beat yourself up. Think about all the things that you get right, all the decisions that you made that worked out really well to make sure that you get that balance in your head, and so on. I mean, I'm not going to go through the whole table. I mean, it's there and you can see it, but you get an idea of the strategy. Think of all the things that all those negative voices that you have, turn them into positive ones, but think about why. Why can I say confidently, actually, yes, I can do this. Yes, I am good enough. I have many strengths, and so on and so forth. I think that's so important. Reflection and self-gratitude. Steve Harvey, I don't know how many of you know who Steve Harvey is. I love Steve Harvey, an African-American comedian, TV host, best-selling author. He talks about having a gratitude jar. He describes it as an empty container that you fill up with things in your life that you're grateful for. And I love the idea. I don't do the gratitude thing like he does, but I have what I call an accomplishments jar. So essentially, it's not a jar actually, it's just in my head. But what I do is at the end of each day, I just kind of think to myself, right, what have you achieved today? What have your accomplishments been? Because the more times you reflect on the things that you've achieved and you remind yourself what you've done and what you've been successful in, the less the imposter syndrome is able to take hold of your mind. And I think that's why that is important. And also this one's a lovely one. So there was a very experienced and respected colleague of mine. He's actually quite significant in the education world. He's written quite a few books and knows an awful lot. So I won't mention his name because I'm not sure he would be very appreciative of me being able to convey that it was him that said this. But he said to me, I became increasingly more confident when I realized that everyone was winging it to some degree. And I think it's true. Everybody's learning the whole time. And it's the thing that I said at the beginning about there not being any experts. Everybody's constantly learning. Things are constantly changing, and we are continuously getting things wrong, changing our approach, refining it, and then trying to improve. And I think that's such an important thing. You know, we don't have, you know, all the answers, and we're constantly trying to be better all the time. And if you know that you're just part of a group of people consistently trying to evolve, be better, then actually you're not an imposter. You're just someone who's learning like everybody else is as well. So that's kind of the imposter syndrome part of it. Paranoia is the other bit that I wanted to talk about in terms of the confronting some of the demons of leadership. So the definition of paranoia, you know, the belief that you're being endangered in some way, such as by someone monitoring you or acting against you, despite the absence of evidence to support this belief. It happens to a lot of individuals at some time in their lives. Now, obviously, you know, there's a distinction between, I guess, what would be kind of a, you know, a medically diagnosed paranoia thing, and what I think is more typical, certainly when you become a leader, which is that you recognize that there are a greater number of people exercising a significantly increased level of scrutiny over everything that you do. And that can make you really paranoid. People just start noticing stuff about you that maybe sometimes you don't even notice yourself. And that can be really difficult to deal with alongside the whole thing about the imposter syndrome. This is really important for me. Just because you're paranoid doesn't mean that they aren't out to get you. And one of the things that I know it's a kind of a funny-ish quote, but what I like about it is that I think that's one of the main challenges when you feel a bit paranoid, is that you don't actually know whether it's justified or not. If you absolutely believed that any paranoia that you had wasn't justified, then actually it ceases to be an issue. Because if you know it's not justified, then you don't need to feel paranoid about it. The thing that makes it tricky is trying to work out which bits are genuine threats to you and which bits are just in your head. And that, I think, is the ultimate challenge. And I'm going to say a little bit about how you can overcome that. I love this from Bishop T.D. Jakes, one of my heroes. Other people's opinions of you is none of your business. And I love that, because it's true, unless you let it become your business. What people think about you is only your business as much as you allow it to be. And one of the things you have to be able to do is to actually distance yourself from the things that people think, as is useful to you, to allow you to keep functioning. And I think that's a really important part of you know, dealing with that sense of paranoia that can come. I also think that there is something about criticism. When you are leading people, it is absolutely inevitable that you are going to receive criticism. It's unavoidable, in the same way that all of us do. All of us at various points in our life, and still do now, criticize those people who are in positions of power, who make decisions, whether they are our bosses, whether they are politicians, or whatever sphere of life. We criticize people all the time, and you too are going to be criticized, and you have to accept it. It's going to happen. But the important thing for me is you have to find a way, and I know this is more easily said than done, but you have to find a way of being able to determine for yourself what is useful and well-meaning feedback that actually is something that you should be taking note of and actually, you know, paying attention to and reflecting on, and which are the bits that come from a negative place, where there are people who basically just, for whatever reason, don't like you or don't want to see you do well, or in some cases have their own issues with leadership and they're projecting those onto you as well. It's a real skill, and I dare say that you never get it right all the time, but you have to find a way of determining for yourself which bits you're going to accept as genuine feedback, and the bits that you're going to just turn down and say, actually, no, I don't need to listen to that because it's nonsense and it has no relation to who I am or what I'm trying to achieve as a leader. And I think that's really key. The idea of not accepting the gift. If someone gives you a bit of criticism, you don't have to accept it. I say this to my daughter a lot, and she does get bored of me saying it, but I say this, you know, if someone gives you a present and you don't accept it, who does the present belong to? And she's like, yeah, okay, I know. It belongs to the person who tried to give me the present. And I say that criticism is exactly the same. You don't have to own it. You don't have to own it. At the end of the day, you just say, that's your view. You're entitled to your view. It is nothing to do with me. It does not reflect who I am. You don't understand the person that I am, or the role that I have, or the challenges that I face, or the complexity of the decisions that I'm trying to make with all of the various different factors. So your criticism is not informed, and therefore I pay no attention to it because it has no meaning to me. You have to be able to do that so that you leave the criticism with the person who's delivering it, and that you don't take it on. And that's so important in preserving your own leadership. And this bit I think is really important. I said earlier on that one of the things that you have to do, and it's a really difficult skill, is to be able to work out which bits of criticism are feedback that is well-meaning and genuine and helpful, and the bits that aren't. And one of the things that you have to be able to do is to use people around you, because they are fantastic, good people at being able to help you work out the difference. So having good people around you who do keep their ear to the ground, who can give you genuine feedback, and you can trust them, because, you know, at the end of the day, they have got your back, but also they are not scared to tell you the truth and be honest. And they are the people to rely on, because they are the ones that you can say, have I got this wrong? Or is it just me? Or is there an issue here, or whatever? Having those sorts of people that you can rely on, who can be open and honest with you, but also want you to do well, are absolute gold dust. So work out who those people are and really rely on them and listen to them, and turn down the noise that comes from elsewhere. So that's the first bit. I feel like I want to pause at this point, and maybe, you know, if there are any questions that anybody has, I'm happy to respond at this point before I go on to the second bit. Is there anything? Obviously, I can't see anyone, so maybe if I just stop sharing my screen for a moment. Oops. Is there anyone who wants to ask anything at this point or comment? Hope I haven't bored you all to tears. No? Okay, so I'll just continue. All right, no problem at all. Fantastic. So that's the first bit, which is for me is as I say, it's about so I'll just share that again. There we go. So for me, that first piece is all about dealing with those uncalm feelings. I'm not saying that imposter syndrome and paranoia are in some way exhaustive. There are lots of other things you have to confront as well. But those were the things that were the most challenging for me when I started leadership. So that's kind of why I refer to those things. So the next bit, becoming calm. Two parts to this. One is about developing a sense of perspective, which is so important. And the second thing is about embracing the difficulty of leadership. So I'll talk about those two things now. So the first one. Okay, again, sorry, back to the sporting thing. My man, Arsene Wenger, he says it's not helpful to become too emotional after the game. The disappointment is big enough. We need to take a little bit of distance. And he said that after getting walloped by Liverpool 4-0. He said that a lot, actually. This phrase he used to use, take a little bit of distance. He used to say that a lot in his interviews. And one of the reasons I really like that is it's kind of practicing the discipline of saying, right, I'm not going to react right now while I'm feeling emotional. I'm going to allow myself to actually address this in a calmer moment, when I can be rational and when I can have a little bit more of a sense of perspective. It enables you to deal with things in a more rational way, and I think that's really important. And I think this is also true. It's kind of this notion about the stuff that we get really consumed by, and actually there's only a tiny part of that which is actually worth getting stressed about. I refer to it as what I call magnitude errors. The idea that, you know, there are things that are problematic, but, you know, are they this, are they that, or are they that? You know, is it a small problem, a medium problem, or a big problem? And I think it's important to find ways to ask yourself that question. You know, how big a deal is it? Is it really? And I think the thing about a sense of perspective is it's difficult, because I don't think it's something that you can just suddenly acquire. I think it is something, like most of leadership, that you develop over time. And actually, it's not just about your experiences professionally in leadership. It's also about your personal experiences too. So, you know, I'll give you an example, and if you've read any of the articles that I've written, you'd have read this example. My youngest daughter is 4.5. She was born with a serious heart defect. We found out about it at the second scan. At 20 weeks, we found out that she had a heart defect and that she would need an operation on her heart when she was born. So we were at Great Ormond Street with her for the first kind of 2 or 3 months of her life, because she spent virtually all her time there. And she had an open heart surgery at 4 months. They cracked her chest open, went into her heart, fixed the various bits that were wrong with it, and then sewed her up again. And that was a really, really difficult and traumatic experience for all of us. But the thing that was really fascinating, and the thing that I learned a lot during that time, was that when we were at Great Ormond Street, as you would imagine, there are lots of very, very ill young people, and some of whom had very negative prognosis in terms of lifespan, many of them with quality of life really poor, and with conditions that had no cure. And the fascinating thing was that despite how difficult that was for myself and my partner, we kind of reflected on the fact that actually, at least our daughter had an issue that could be resolved by the operation, as horrible as it was. And I think that's the kind of thing for me that absolutely makes the point about developing a sense of perspective, because no matter how difficult things are, things could always be worse. And I have this saying that I always say, which is that, you know, there's always someone who's prepared to swap your problem with their problem. And I think that's really important when you get yourself into difficult times, to remind yourself that actually, do you know what, as bad as this feels at the moment, it isn't necessarily quite as bad as it feels emotionally. So this is some of the things that I do to kind of, when I feel myself getting to a point where I feel, oh my God, this is really difficult. Is this life or death? Because actually, if it's not, then how important can it really be? You know, whatever the situation, it could be worse. What happens if I get this wrong? You know, how bad is it really? Is it actually a disaster, or is it just a disappointment? I can come back from it. The fourth one is absolutely the case for me. If I suddenly got a call to say that one of my children was in hospital in A&E, the thing that I'm now stressing about, would I stress about it, or would I just suddenly forget about it? Suddenly it's in the background, it's unimportant, and it doesn't matter at all. So why does it matter so much now in my head? Can I do something about the situation to make it better? If yes, great. Don't worry, just sort it. Don't overthink it. Work out what needs to be done and just start doing it. If the answer is no, I can't do anything about the situation, then actually worrying is not going to achieve anything at all, because it's not in your control. So find a way to put it to one side, and it will play out how it plays out, because you can't do anything to affect it. And I think you kind of have to just accept that sometimes. You know, if I sleep on it, the Arsene Wenger thing, take a little bit of distance. If I sleep on this, will it feel different in the morning? Do I just need to take a while to allow some emotional distance? I love this idea. This is a challenge. So therefore, it's an opportunity for growth. Whenever something scares you, you're about to do something that's going to stretch you. And that means you're going to learn something. And I think that's something that I try to kind of get excited rather than scared. I know that physiologically, there's very little difference, if any, between the physiological feelings of excitement and fear. So I think you can try with your mindset to push it into the idea of, actually, this is exciting. I'm about to do something really exciting now. Like, you know, the first time you start a new job, you know, that nervousness is also excitement, isn't it, about taking on a new challenge. So it's trying to shift the balance so that you're thinking more about the excitement aspect of it rather than necessarily the fear. And that absolute faith and belief that actually it will be fine. Now, that's not just blind faith, as I was saying before. You reinforce that with the things that you've overcome before, the challenges you've overcome before successfully, to reinforce that notion that actually, you know, it's going to be okay. So all those things are really important in terms of really gaining a sense of perspective. Gratitude, I said that thing, the thing about someone being ready to change their problems for yours. Be grateful for the things that you do have, because that helps you maintain a sense of perspective. Somebody with a lot less than you is happy. There's a reason for that. It's in the mind, it's a mindset, it's an approach. It's not driven by circumstance, or at least I should say it doesn't have to be. This is what I think about. So, bearing in some of the stuff I just talked about, your life experiences, what difficult times did you manage to pull through? How did you do it? What were the key lessons that you learned? Consider how you can draw on those lessons of those different journeys to help you maintain a sense of perspective when things get tough. Draw upon the things that you've done. And the other thing is to make a list of all the things that are more important to you than your work. What would you drop absolutely everything for, no matter what? And those are the things that are worth stressing about, and nothing else. So that's kind of just a way of trying to put that in some sort of perspective as well. So I'm going to move on to the next thing, which is embracing that leadership is difficult. Now, I listen to a lot of stuff, podcasts, and I do a lot of audio books and stuff, and I listen to a lot of people on YouTube. Jim Rohn is one of my absolute favorites. He passed away a long time ago, I think back in 2009, but he's amazing. And one of the things that he says about leadership, I love of their life until they had suffered and sweated and sacrificed and kept their focus and fought through the tears and trials and tests. Aren't I making leadership sound like fun? But I think it's important to recognize that it comes with the territory. I say to my leadership team all the time, leadership is important, is difficult, and it's supposed to be. We are in the business of taking tough decisions, which is what leaders are supposed to do. All the easy stuff should have been done by someone else. So expect that if it comes in through your inbox or lands on your desk or knocks on your office door, it's going to be something which is difficult and challenging, because that's the role of leadership. It's supposed to be that way. You don't become a fireman and say, I'm not getting up that ladder, that's ridiculous, it's too high up there and it's too dangerous. I'm not getting anywhere near that burning building because I'm not taking that heat, I'm not going to take the risk. You do the job because it is what it is. And I think leadership is exactly the same. And that's why it comes back to the thing about the Jim Rohn quote. It's not about trying to make it easier. Of course we want to make it easier, but the reality is that it's tough. And so wish that you were better and able to cope with it, and know that that is a normal part of leadership. Because I think that if you can embrace that attitude, if you can say, this stuff is tough because it needs to be tough, and I embrace it because this is what I'm here for, then when those things do land, that sense of dread that you get, and we all get it, you can't not get it, but you can handle it quicker, because you get that sense of dread and you say, right, it's fine. This is what I'm supposed to do, and this is what I need to do. And I think that's really important. I think there are various stages of my career. I think, as I've mentioned to you at the start, when I first became a leader, the first 3 years I was scared of everything. I was just petrified. I was having all the imposter syndrome and paranoia, all that kind of stuff, the lack of self-belief. And actually, at some stage, I moved from being the person who had to make a tough decision and wished that it was someone else's decision to make, to the point where I now am really grateful that I get to be the one to make it. And that's not because I'm confident that I'm necessarily going to get the outcome right, because I'm not sure that that's ever guaranteed. I believe that as human beings, we are wrong all the time. One of my life ambitions is to be less wrong today than I was yesterday, and keep incrementally doing that every single day. Because I think that, you think back 1 year, 3 years, 5 years or whatever, you can always think of something in your past that you would say, oh my God, what was that about? What was I thinking? I can't believe I did that, or I can't believe that I said that. I can't believe I handled it in that way, because we're always consistently wrong and improving to become better all the time. So I think that it's really important that if you embrace that as a concept, then what it means is that whenever you're faced with those challenges, you take a lot of the pressure off yourself, because actually you know that you cannot guarantee getting it right. But the reason why you embrace the opportunity to be the person to make the decision, the reason why I now feel to myself, actually, I'm really glad that I get to make the decision, I'm pleased that it's me, is because although I cannot guarantee the right outcome, what I can guarantee is, within my control, is the ability to make sure that I do everything that I can possibly do to try to make sure that I do get the right outcome, and that I trust myself to do that. And that's the kind of growth that you're looking for, to get to that stage where actually you're ready to own it. And I think that's really important. So that's what that's about. And as I said, you know, it is supposed to be tough, because what we do as leaders is we solve problems. That's the absolute essence of leadership. We solve problems. But the more responsibility and the more accountability, the more problems you have to solve and the more complex that they are. So it goes with the territory. But thank goodness for that, because if it wasn't difficult, then what job leadership, and what fulfillment do you get from it? You know, what sense of achievement do you get from getting great outcomes? It's because it's tough. So it's great, and embrace that. And that's what I think is really important. I think the main reason that it's really difficult is because, as I said at the beginning, you know, leadership is primarily about people, and leading people is difficult because people are complex. You know, you deal with all different people from all different walks of life who present different challenges. Some people are amazing, and some people are, as it says on the slide, some people are not great, and you have to find ways to lead them. And dealing with people's behaviors, you know, changing behaviors, changing attitudes, getting people to be on board, getting people to be part of your team, that stuff is the difficult stuff. And that's why you have to embrace that part of it and really think about how you're going to deal with people in a way that allows you to flourish and succeed. But that's why it has to be difficult. So Clive Woodward, another one of the people that I admire, you know, successful England rugby coach in the past, he says the two most important skills as an effective leader possesses are things that we can all do if we choose to. The first is to be really good at listening. And the second is to remain permanently curious, open and willing to learn. And I think that's absolutely key. So one of the best ways in which you can make your leadership feel less difficult and really embrace that is by really focusing on your leadership of people, which is one of the main things about the calm leadership stuff. We're leading people. Think about the Carlo Ancelotti quote at the beginning when he talked about treating people as mature people, respectful, you know, mutual respect. The fact that your leadership speaks for itself, because actually people trust you to do the right thing. They trust your integrity because of the way that you communicate with them, the way that you relate to them, the way that you show that sense of being able to listen and genuinely learn as you hear, and allowing that to impact on your decisions as well. So I think for me, that's a really critical thing to be able to do in order to develop your leadership. Okay, so that's that one. So I've done the first two now. So confront and also adapt. I'm going to touch on the last two. I'm not going to spend very, very long on them, but I will say a couple of things about them by way of, you know, as you can tell, I love my quotes and I love my sort of famous people quotes. So the importance of being honest, having integrity and humility. Nelson Mandela says, as I've said, the first thing is to be honest with yourself. You can never have an impact on society if you've not changed yourself. Great peacemakers are all people of integrity, of honesty and humility. And I think those things are so important for being able to build trust within the team that you're leading and trust within the people who are there to follow you. I think that's so critical. I have a thing in my school where during COVID, you would have had different versions of this in your own schools, but during COVID there was the whole thing about what happens if you test positive, and how does that work in terms of, you know, work and being counted sick and leave of absence and all this kind of stuff. And I remember being in a meeting with my secondary head colleagues, and we were talking about some of the difficulties of, you know, people potentially pretending that they've got COVID when they haven't and all this kind of stuff. And most of the heads were talking about, you know, they were saying things like, you know, oh yeah, we make people report it to the NHS, they've got to report it, and then they've got to send us a screenshot of them reporting it, and the response they get, the automated response, and or they've got to take a picture of the COVID test and all this kind of stuff. And I was like, I said, you know what? I don't do any of that at all. I trust that my staff members are just going to tell the truth. So if they say, Patrick, I tested positive this morning, I just took it as read. I didn't ask for proof. I didn't ask for photocopies of this and screenshots of that and all the rest of it. I just said, okay, so, you know, your 5 days starts now, or your 7 days starts now, and all that kind of stuff that we had to do. And I trust them. Now, does that mean that everybody is trustworthy? Well, absolutely not. You know, does it mean that there are some people who got away with taking the mickey? Yeah, probably they did. But I guarantee you, even the people that had to report and take screenshots and all the rest of it, some of them took the mickey as well, because it's not difficult to take a screenshot or find an image on the internet of a positive COVID test. You know, you can send anything off to the NHS, whether you've tested positive or not, because ultimately it doesn't actually matter, because most people during that process were self-testing anyway. So my thing is that you can try to legislate to kind of get people to be honest by treating people like you don't trust them, but I don't think it actually works. I think the way that you get people to be open and honest is to give that trust in the first instance. And then obviously, if there are people who do things that clearly out them as people that cannot be trusted, who do not act with integrity and so on, then you deal with it, you know, and then you treat them differently, and you respond to the situation as you would do, whether it's a conversation, whether it's an HR issue or whatever it might be. But my thing is that my initial approach is to treat people with respect as adults and if they're trustworthy in the first instance. And that encourages people to be honest with you. And I think that's the kind of dialogue that I want as part of my leadership as well. Optimism is really key. I love this quote from Colin Powell, you know, perpetual optimism is a force multiplier. I think, you know, being optimistic, I was having this conversation yesterday with one of my students, year 13 student. We had our year 13 leavers party yesterday. And she was saying to me, so you're always talking to us about being optimistic, but life is really difficult, and there's so much sadness, and there's so many things that happen. How can we always be optimistic? And it's a really good question, because I think, well, yeah, that's true. You know, how can you always be optimistic? So I said to her, the thing for me is that the reason why I always strive for the optimism is because I recognize that there is very little point of being anything else, because I don't know what pessimism actually achieves. Now, I'm not talking about the stuff where you say, right, let's be cautious and let's think about what can go wrong. That for me is not pessimism. That's trying to make sure that you're gathering the relevant evidence to make good decisions. Pessimism is the belief that it's never going to work. It can't work. We can't achieve this. We can't do it. It's all doom and gloom. I don't see that there is anything productive or useful in that. The optimism is the thing that enables you to keep moving forward and last for a long time. But importantly, it's so critical for the people that you lead to see your optimism, because otherwise it starts to impact on them as well. So I love this quote as part of the, as I say, leading other people. And I absolutely love this woman. Jacinda Ardern, I think, was just the most incredible leader. And what I loved about her was the fact that she was unapologetically herself. And that's her quote. I'm sure you probably heard it before. You know, one of the criticisms I've faced over the years is that I'm not aggressive enough or assertive enough, or maybe somehow, because I'm empathetic, it means I'm weak. I totally rebel against that. I refuse to believe that you cannot be both compassionate and strong. And that, in my leadership, is really important. I value compassion hugely. And some people think that compassion equals weakness, but it absolutely doesn't. You know, when I think about the situations where I have had to lose people from the school, whether it's some disciplinary issue and there's a dismissal, or whether it's been a redundancy thing, I've made really difficult decisions that I know have had devastating impacts on people's lives. But you have to be strong, and you have to do what is necessary in a given situation. But your strength in being able to do it is in no way compromised by the compassionate way in which you try to handle it. And I think ultimately the compassion bit isn't about the decision that you make. It's about the way in which you do it and the way in which you treat people when you're making those decisions, and when you're communicating things that maybe you know are not going to land particularly well. And I think that's really important. So that for me is a really important part of being able to sleep at night. So when I talk about being able to lead for a long period of time, to be able to deal with some of the stresses, one of the most important things is being able to sleep easy at night. And the fact that you know that you lead with empathy and kindness allows you to do that, knowing that you're trying to always do the right thing. And I'm going to just end with a very quick video clip. This is another guy that I listen to a lot. You may know him, Simon Sinek. He talks a lot about leadership and about leadership of people and human empathy and all of those sorts of things. Here he's talking about one of his books called The Infinite Game. Really good book if you had a chance to read it. But I'm not going to play you the whole book, just about 2 minutes of it, and then we're going to wrap up.
Trusting teams. I went on a business trip to Las Vegas, and they put me up at the Four Seasons out there, which is a beautiful hotel. And one of the reasons it's a wonderful hotel is not because of the fancy beds. Any hotel can buy a fancy bed. The reason the Four Seasons is a fantastic hotel is because of the people who work there. That when you roam the halls and somebody says hello, you get the distinct feeling that they wanted to say hello, not that they were told to say hello. We're highly tuned social animals. We can tell the difference. Like we can always tell when someone's working on commission, right? You can kind of feel it, right? We can tell the difference when somebody's genuinely being friendly or not. They happen to have a coffee bar in the lobby there at the Four Seasons in Las Vegas. And one afternoon, I went and bought myself a cup of coffee. And there was a barista working that day named Noah. Noah was funny and engaging, charming. I spent far too long standing there buying my cup of coffee because I just so enjoyed talking to Noah. So as is my nature, I asked Noah a question. I said, do you like your job? And without skipping a beat, Noah said, I love my job. Now, in my line of business, that's significant because like is rational. I like the people I work with. I like the job. I like the challenge. I get paid well. I like my job. Love is emotional. It's a higher order connection. Do you love your wife? I like her a lot, right? There's a difference. Noah said, I love my job. My ears perked up. He has an emotional connection to this company. This is interesting. So I immediately follow up and I said, tell me specifically what the Four Seasons is doing that you would say to me, you love your job. Without skipping a beat, Noah said that throughout the day, managers will walk past him and ask him how he's doing, ask him if there's anything that he needs to do his job better. Not just his manager, any manager. And then he also said, I also work at Caesar's Palace. And there, the managers walk past us and catch us when we're doing things wrong and make sure that we're making the numbers and performing. And there I like to just keep my head below the radar and get through the day and collect my paycheck. He said, only at the Four Seasons do I feel I can be myself. This is the exact same human being. And yet the customer service experience that we would have meeting him at one hotel or the other will be profoundly different, not because of the person, but because of the leaders.
So I'll stop that there, but you get the idea. And what I really love about that example is that it kind of emphasizes the importance of leadership, because in the end, we lead the people that we lead and we work with who we work with. And we have to reflect actually that there are things that we can do that have an influence on that in terms of the approach that we take and the impact that we have on the people that we lead. And that example makes a really clear example of how the same person can be completely different in different contexts, depending on the culture, the environment, and the behavior of the leaders. And I think that's something that for me is so important in terms of this notion of how you lead people. If you get it right, then you can you can get people that really want to work for you. They're loyal, they'll do anything for you because of the way in which they feel valued. And I think that's a really important of you being able to lead in a really calm way.
Trusting team.
Skip that. Okay, and then the last bit is really conveying external calm, and all I will say about that, I'm not going to go into the detail because obviously it's nearly 5:15 and we're going to be wrapping up soon. I will have some time for some questions if you've got any, but I think that ultimately all of these things and this kind of journey leads to the point where what you really want to be able to do to be able to really lead calmly and feel comfortable in your leadership is to be the best leadership version of yourself. And what I mean by that is that you have to determine what is your leadership. What kind of leadership do you possess? What kind of leader do you want to be? And be really true to that, because that's the easiest way in which you can lead with a degree of confidence, with a degree of calm, and actually feeling like you're being yourself. If you don't do that, if you attempt to be somebody else, someone who does things in a particular way, then what you'll find is that you're not comfortable in that position and it's more stressful. I'll give you one example just to finish off with. When I first started headship, I had some trouble with the unions. Unions are my favorite people. Not at all, but I had some difficulty with the NUT as they were then, and I didn't quite know how to deal with it. And I contacted two of my head teacher colleagues, both of whom were really experienced and very, very good head teachers, really successful. And the first one, she just said, "Oh, I don't have it. Don't let them in. Don't have it. Shove them out of the building. Don't give an inch. You tell them what you're going to do. And when they're doing nonsense, you let the staff know. I brought them down. I drove them out of my school. I wasn't having any of that rubbish." So that was her approach. And, I wouldn't critique it because I know that's what she genuinely did. And I also know that it worked for her, because actually her school had a staff body that were very, very happy and very collegiate and worked really well together, and the union influence actually wasn't a significant one. So that's the way that she achieved it, and all power to her. The second colleague that I spoke to, he was completely different. He said, find out what they want, sit down and ask them, what do you want? What is it that would give you the outcome that would allow this issue to be resolved? And if you can give them what they want, without compromising any of the things that you are trying to achieve, without giving away anything that you don't want to give, then give it to them. If they're happy and you don't mind because you're not giving away anything that you shouldn't be given, then give it to them. And if you can't, then that's where you have a negotiation and you talk it through with them and you work out what you can give and you find ways forward. Now, you can probably work out from everything else that I've said whose approach I was more aligned to. But I guess the point that I'm making is that had I tried to be the first head teacher and I tried to confront and, drive the union out and get into all of that kind of battle territory, I would have been stressed beyond belief, because it wasn't the person that I am and it doesn't align to the way that I want to lead. So it wouldn't have worked. And even if it had have worked, if I'd managed to, put that cloak on and do it, I don't know how I would have felt about doing it. I talked about being able to sleep easy at night and those sorts of things. You can't do it when you're not being yourself. Whereas the second approach, which was naturally mine, it works for me. And that's why I'm still doing the same approach now. And it works for me. And I think that's what I'm really saying is that, for me, the ultimate way to be a leader, to develop being a leader, to be able to lead for a long, long time and not allow it to be a burnout job, is to gain control of that inner dialogue, to think about the ways in which you want to convey your leadership, but make sure that all of those things are absolutely aligned with your authenticity as a leader. So I'm nearly done now. I've got one more slide, I think. And I want to share this with you because this is a slide that means an awful lot to me. I saw this on I think on a Twitter feed or something, and I just fell in love with it. I got it put on a mug that I've got in my house, and I've got it on my wall at work. I've got it into a little frame and everything. It's just the thing that reminds me of part of who I am. I'm very big on this idea that, you know, being the leader that you want to be involves bringing your whole self to the job. You've got to bring everything that you are. And that means, for me personally, recognizing my heritage and recognizing that I stand on the shoulder of giants, people who have worked hard and sacrificed a huge amount to give me the opportunity to do what I'm doing now. And this sustains me in difficult moments. I look at that and I say, do you know what? This is it. You better walk into that room and take control of this thing, because there are people who've done everything possible to give you this chance, and you owe it to them to make sure that you don't mess it up. And on that note, I'm going to stop. I'm sorry that's been really, really long, but I hope that's been helpful in some way. If you want to contact me, I'm more than happy to be in contact with anyone, you know, any advice or support or queries or anything like that. You know, my email is there. I'm very, very active on LinkedIn. Twitter less so. My Twitter's usually about football and stuff, but on LinkedIn I post a lot about this stuff and other things as well. So thank you very much for listening, and I will stop sharing. There we go.
Thank you so much, Patrick, for that. There's so much we can take out of that. I mean, in particular, I really like that quote you made into a mug. I think I'm going to do exactly the same thing. Walk into the room like your ancestors sent you there. And thank you so much for talking about the confronting, the imposter syndrome, and how to adapt. And we're really, really looking forward to creating the space for you to do the L and the M. So we'll look at the leading and the maturity, hopefully very, very soon.